We are talking about the Terminators in this week's episode. You remember last week's episode, we got the breaking news that they had made a trade. They had traded Justin Herbert for Russell Wilson and DK Metcalf. But before that, we had rated his team per the draft. So these ratings do not incorporate the trade into them. But Bryce, we've got a 5.67 overall. We got 5.25 for the short term and 4.75 for the long term. You gave Danny a 7 for the short term and a 5 for the long term, and I gave a 4 for the short term and a 5 for the long term. Now, obviously, that trade would skew my score a little bit here, but how are you feeling about the Terminators as they sit today?
I think that trade, I probably valued as short term a little higher than everybody else, and I think it makes my evaluation a little bit better that he got two starting assets for the price of one. Because when you're looking at the short term, you're looking at a shorter window, and I think when you're adding two starting players for one and significantly better when it comes to like putting DK Metcalf in the wide receiver spot or flex spot or whatever he's going to have him for over his other options, that it gives him a better win now window. So I believe I gave him the highest short-term grade. So it makes it look a lot better. So I feel much more comfortable with it. I don't think the trade was unfair in any way, but I still probably would have preferred Justin Herbert. The way he went about it was a little strange to me because, when you put a player of that caliber up for trade, I'm trying to, I'm casting a net rather than just a line. So I would have put it in the chat. Hey, Justin Herbert's available. Come see what you'd pay for him. Where it seems like maybe he just like was talking to one or two guys and got maybe a quick deal that maybe he was panicking on because he spent too much money on a small group of players in the auction draft. But, it worked out for him. So I like the trade overall for his team and for the guy that received Justin Herbert. Would it increase your short-term value for him?
Yeah, definitely better for the short term having another starting quarterback to replace the one that he traded, and then having a wide receiver that's leaps and bounds above who he would have been starting instead. So, he got caught with his hand in the cookie jar during the draft is what I think happened. He had thought that Herbert was going to go for more and got stuck with the high bid when he wasn't really intending to win. He was intending to bid him up, which is, a strategy, but it's a dangerous strategy. And so immediately after, he had to go back to the drawing board and figure out how to lengthen his starters a little bit here. And I think that's what happened. Bryce, we're talking about your team now. Let's get down to the nitty gritty. You got a 5.79 overall. You got a 5.43 for the short term and a 6.43 for the long term. And I'll tell you this, for the short term, I gave you a 5. And for the long term, I gave you a 6. How are you feeling about your team at this moment?
I was a little shocked when the grades came out. I really thought that my short-term grade would be much higher than my long-term. Because I did grab some youth when it came to like wide receiver with Jackson Smith and Jigba and kind of Chris Olave being two of my more expensive guys. Which I guess attributes to the long-term grade, but I really rounded out my team with some veteran players that I didn't plan on gathering, like Derrick Henry and Davante Adams. I thought they would maybe drive my short term up a lot more than it did. But, I think we talked about it in an earlier episode where this draft just did not go to plan. And my strategy going into it was I didn't want to spend more than 15% of my budget on any one player. And I did accomplish that goal by spending, I think, 130 on, I believe, Watson and Chris Olave being my two most expensive players. I think I've got a solid core of, I believe we start 12 guys in this league. So I like what my starting lineup looks after that. I doubt you're going to see a lot of people that are too comfortable with their depth when you have to start 12 players, but there's a lot of opportunity for some guys like Raheem Mostert if Jonathan Taylor doesn't end up there. I really liked what happened with tight end, getting Michael Mayer as my backup tight end. And like Danny, I did get my hand stuck in the cookie jar trying to drive up Kyle Pitts' price, but I guess that's an okay player to get stuck with. He did go for the most out of all the tight ends in the draft, but didn't plan on that and had to adjust accordingly. But I guess it gives me a little hope that a lot of these guys like yourself see my team more as a long-term play, which you still like to see. And it seems like my younger guys are most of them are relatively established outside of, I guess, argue Jackson Smith and Jigba and Jordan Love. So what were your thoughts and maybe giving me a better long-term grade than a short-term grade?
Well, the long term, with those young receivers, I like that a lot. But my biggest question mark was Jordan Love. We have no idea.
Right.
Deshaun Watson was really bad last year after a huge ordeal, and I wouldn't say bad. He just wasn't what he was before.
Correct.
So we don't know if he's going to get back to that after everything that he's been through. Obviously, Derrick Henry's good, but getting to that age where you got to start worrying about injuries and falling off. And then, Adams has question marks at quarterback in Las Vegas. I don't really think it's going to, plummet him, but maybe we don't see the same production that we've seen in recent years. Same thing with Mike Evans down there in Tampa Bay. Just today, Baker Mayfield was named the quarterback. So that was my issue with the short term, is just we've got question marks at quarterback. Obviously, if they both bounce back, that changes everything. And then if those aging guys and the QB issues aren't as bad as, some think, I don't think it's going to be horrible. I don't think either of those guys are going to kill your team, but you really want the high level performance, especially out of Adams, out of those older guys, and Henry. And that is what I'm not 100% sure on. Love Jackson Smith and Jigba. You know that. I think he is probably the best receiver that the Seahawks have right now. Olave, awesome. Only young one that I'm not real high on is Johnston. But then, I love Davante when he gets healthy. Pacheco looks like he's going to get all the touches again for at least this year. So your team definitely has a shot in the short term. It's just there's question marks around some of those guys for me if we're going to get their top tier performance. And then a couple of the guys, how good are they going to be? The Jordan Loves, the JSNs for his rookie year, second year. So that's really where I'm at with it. It's not that I think it's bad. It's just there are question marks there. There's a lot of guys that aren't certain, and then a lot of guys that are kind of at the end, towards the end of what you would think their career would be. So that's where the questions come in for me.
Yeah, and my strategy is for those veteran guys, if it's not looking like I'm competing, I would imagine that if Derrick Henry and Davante Adams stay healthy, they should still be worth a first-round pick to a contender if they're one of the ones that didn't sell them in the draft. One of the 6 that didn't sell them in the draft, or 5 of them, whatever.
Yeah, that's the tough part, right? With the way this draft went, and with Brian Cybersleuths, who we talked about in the last episode, he got all the first round picks and he doesn't want to trade them. So it's going to be hard to unload veterans in this first season. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah. I think there's only 4 teams now that have picks in the first round. I think you, me, Matt, Cybersleuths, maybe one other. I mean, I think that almost all the first round picks are owned by 4 guys now. And we just own our own.
Yeah. I don't have any extra ones. So that's going to be interesting to see there. And then speaking of, oddly enough, our teams finished right basically in the middle of the pack, and I am up next. Now, I got a 5.86, so just 0.07 higher than you. I got a 5.57 in the short term and a 6.14 in the long term. So I was more consolidated. I wasn't there wasn't a lot of difference between my short and long, whereas your gap was a little bit bigger, but we got real close there. You gave me a 7 in the short term and a 4 for the long term. So why don't you tell me what you thought about my draft?
So the only reason I gave you such a lower grade in the long term is because the youthful players that you do have, I feel like they're on a prove it year, and that's like Justin Fields right now, Desmond Ridder, he's Kenny Pickett. These guys got to perform probably this year, or those teams could potentially be looking to move on. I'm much more confident in Justin Fields being proving himself this upcoming season with the weapons he has at hand. But it's still to be said that he just hasn't proven himself as a polished passer in the NFL yet. And that time frame, that window doesn't stay open very long, especially when you're going into your third season. So that's really the only reason like I gave you probably such a low long-term grade, but I still love Justin Fields. I like Desmond Ridder for the short term because I feel like all three of your quarterbacks, actually Ridder, Pickett, and Fields, all have such good rushing upside this upcoming season that they could just be fantasy machines, even if they don't have long careers. Bijan Robinson, way less question marks long term for him because I think he's just a phenomenal athlete. That's probably the main player that salvaged your short term grade for me personally. Or I'm sorry, your long term grade for me personally. But your short term, I just really like also with Calvin Ridley, Evan Ingram. There's just so many of these veteran guys that I've been targeting in other leagues. I was trying to target them in this draft. Aaron Jones, another one. These are guys I really, really love for this upcoming season to make you a potential playoff team. It's hard for guys like us who didn't spend extra money in the draft to get proven players. So we kind of are set behind the eight ball with these guys that got the extra $100 to get maybe a couple of extra proven players. I mean, some of these veteran players like Mike Evans, Davante Adams were going for $40 to $60. Those are two guys you could have added to your lineup that would have been huge assets. So I just really like it. Jerry Jeudy, another guy. I feel like he's kind of going into a prove it season as well. He needs to stay healthy. I think he's capable of it, but it just still like he's not a proven guy to be on that team or just to be a player in the league that's continuously getting a lot of targets, getting a lot more opportunities. He's going into his fourth year now. So I do like this team short term. You got a lot of guys I've targeted in a lot of leagues, and I think I targeted them in this draft. It just didn't go for the price I preferred them for.
Yeah, obviously, just like you mentioned when you were talking about your team, you go in with a plan and then it just gets disrupted like in the first 12 hours of the auction. And that's kind of what happened to me. I'm not a big Kenny Pickett fan. I'm not a big Desmond Ridder fan, but they were at a price that I could afford after getting Bijan and Justin Fields, who I spent a bunch of money on. I do have a lot of Chicago players on here, but I feel like their offense is criminally underrated. And on my taxi, like I think Roshan and Tank Bigsby are both rookies that could see a lot of action this year. But other than that, like, the receivers, I just wanted to target guys that are going to get a ton of targets. Jerry Jeudy, DJ Moore, Calvin Ridley, those guys I think are just going to get peppered over and over and over. If something would happen to DJ Moore, would be the Bears number one. I've been saying it for the past 2 months. Claypool is the number two. It's not Darnell Mooney. So I think he's criminally undervalued everywhere. And then, just lengthening it out with Evan Ingram, Darren Waller, Cole Kmet. Again, guys that I think are going to get a ton of targets, plus this being tight end premium, 1.75 per reception, and then the first down bonus of 0.5. I wanted to load up on a ton of tight ends and just hope a few of them hit. So I like Juwan Johnson as a dark horse, Jake Ferguson as a dark horse, and those guys could give me some trade value to improve in other spots if I need to. So I feel pretty good about it. I think that if some of these guys break out, the Jerry Judys, I say DJ Moore, but it's not that he's been bad. It's just that there's a lot more upside with him than we've seen with the quarterbacks that he's played with. So yeah, I'm very interested to see how this team plays out. I did a little bit different than I've done any of my other drafts. I've got a lot of guys that I wouldn't typically be drafting, but the price fell into the right spot. So it worked out all right. Okay, the last team for this episode is the Big Dippers. Taylor Meredith. He got a 6.43 overall, a 6.71 in the short term, which was much higher than any of the other teams in this episode, and then a 5.86 for the long term. I gave him an 8 for the short term and a 7 for the long term, so I really liked his team. You gave him a 4 for the short term and a 5 for the long term. So we're on a little bit different of a page here. I can tell you, I thought, he's got the 2 veteran quarterbacks with Kirk Cousins and Geno Smith. I love Cam Akers this year. Joe Mixon might miss a couple games. We'll see when that suspension comes from all the stuff he's going through. I still love Ramondre, and he's a guy that's going to give a couple more years. Cam's going to give a couple more years at running back. Don't know how long Mixon's got. McKinnon is going to be great as long as he's healthy for the Chiefs. The way they used him the second half of the season last year, huge. I feel like he's got a lot of depth at running back. And then he's got veterans like Hopkins, CD Lamb, to go with some younger wide receivers like Garrett Wilson and Sky Moore if he pans out. Michael Pittman's another one that I like a lot. Going to get a lot of targets. And then TJ Hawkinson. Tyler Higbee is just steady at tight end, so he's going to have a starter there no matter what. And then some upside with guys like Greg Dulcich and, Mo Alley Cox. So I just felt like his team was really, really balanced. His veterans are at like quarterback where they can still play for 5-6 more years if Geno doesn't come back to old Geno. Plus he's got Brock Purdy. I'm not a Brock Purdy guy, but if he could be the starting quarterback for the 49ers for the next 3-4 years. And then he's got a couple young running backs to go with a couple of the veterans. And then, good balance at wide receiver. So I just feel like his team's like in that spot where it could be good for a few years.
Yeah, I probably was a little harsh on my short-term grade, being a 4. I don't know if maybe I overlooked some players. But I can say there's some players that would have contributed to me to giving him maybe such a low short-term grade would probably be like Michael Pittman Jr. I don't mind Michael Pittman Jr. long-term whatsoever, but I'm just not convinced that Anthony Richardson's a good passer. And I really think that he's going to have to run the ball a lot this upcoming season to be valuable. I don't trust a guy that had that much athletic ability and got that hyped, and his production in college didn't follow it. I know there's a lot of things that can contribute to that, but when you're getting hyped up more than Lamar was, and Lamar, absolutely dominated in every statistical category. I get it, not the same conference, and there's a lot of variables that attribute to that. I'm just not sold on it. I think at the time we rated this, we weren't sure where DeAndre Hopkins was going to go. So I didn't really maybe take his veteran presence into accountability for it as well. I'm not big on Alexander Madison and or Joe Mixon this upcoming season. I think those guys are overrated going into this season, which probably, again, put the value pretty low for me short term. Geno may have started off hot last year, but he kind of started to look like old Geno going into the back half of the season, especially maybe not every game, but we're starting to see hints of it more and more where we didn't see it the front half of the season. So that was probably something I shied away from when it came to his short-term grade as well, and long-term. But I do think Brock Purdy will be a solid number 2 quarterback for him if he can maintain the starter. And Kirk Cousins will give you relief for a couple of upcoming seasons to where you don't have to address quarterback right away. I think we both love Garrett Wilson in every which way, short-term, long-term. And of course, CD Lamb is a top dynasty asset as well. And along with Ramondre Stevenson and Cam Akers, who are really my top 4 players on this team. I like them for this season and in the upcoming season, which probably attributed to him being, not too terrible of a long-term grade for me, kind of the middle of the pack. And then he has tight end pretty covered with TJ Hawkinson for the next couple of years. Again, I probably have him too low at the short-term grade, but I think my long-term grade is pretty fair. More of a balanced roster with veteran presence in there with some guys that you can build around for the future.
Hey, if you want to watch the first 4 teams that we evaluated, click right here.